everyone, this is Gilbert Gelad. I'm talking to you here from Private Corporate Counsel downtown. This is Tufts On Tax. All your tax questions and answers are right here with Mr. T. Scott Tufts. When it comes to taxes and tax law, he is the expert and the master. Now, today we are having our last episode for the season, episode 71 for this Christmas season, season 4. Now, this is our season 4 for Tufts On Tax. Hello, Scott. How are you?
Hey, good to be with you.
Good to be with you, too. And today we are talking about when is the advice that you receive would not necessarily protect you? And this is about before filing your tax returns and before receiving your K-1, correct?
Correct.
Well, what can you tell us about that?
So what we're talking about here is just trying to stay on top of things. It's not easy when the tax laws are very complex for our audience, and there are some surprising twists and turns when you look at things. So when we're looking at cases that come out, and Rosselli, Rosselli, is one of them. It's out of the tax court in October of 2023.
Oh, so that's recent.
Yeah. So what happened is that when certain things happen that are unfortunate for our audience, when let's say they have relationships with accountants, and then they have questions come up about those relationships, or in the case that happened with the Rosellis, if some very unforeseen things happen, you still have to remain vigilant in your filing responsibilities. So what happened in Rosselli was a situation where a company that they got involved with, they, and again, according to the facts of the case, this is kind of what we're just reciting. Mr. Rosselli is a licensed housing appraiser, according to the facts of the case, and with Mrs. Rosselli, a homemaker and mother, taking care of their 5 kids, some of whom had special needs and whatnot. And
God bless her heart.
Yeah,
kids,
yeah,
huh?
and you know, so this is kind of like our audience, right? You're dealing with a lot. Taxes are complex. You try and get them done and whatnot. So Mr. Rosselli, with an appraisal business, ran into a gentleman who was a founder of a solar energy company known as DC Solar. And so in the facts of the case, what it's talking about there is in the course or dialogue of his meeting this other person, he's asked to step in and become involved in the company. And in doing that, he sets up a management company to, the audience we've talked about, to set up a business. Mr. Rosselli sets up that business company and is involved in trying to assist in getting that up and running. And in the course of doing that, some significant deposits are made into the Roselli's bank accounts through their management company. And the question becomes, okay, how are the taxes going to work themselves out? And in the relationship with this company, there became a lot of confusion arising over the K-1s that were getting issued. And in the course of those K-1s, Mr. Rosselli was led to believe there would be significant losses. And so far so good. You know, those K-1s are shared with his preparer. Those losses are generated for the 2017 year in the case. And so, you know, you have a sense, and you're rightfully thinking, hey, I'm involved in this business. It's generating a lot of losses. That's going to help offset my income that I make. Very reasonable. Our audience would all understand that if that kind of thing is unfolding, then they might have a reason to believe they don't have the necessary income on a net basis to have to worry about paying taxes. The problem they get, and the Rosellis, to their credit, have a CPA who they're getting advice from, and so these are the kinds of things that are unfolding in the facts of the case. What's interesting, though, is after they're made aware of the losses from the 2017 year, which was alerted to them in September of 18. Remember, one of the difficulties for folks is that these K1s come late in the year. Even after the due date of your taxes, they're coming later in the year. And when you get them last minute, you're then finding out that, oh boy, now what do I do? So with regard to the 2017 taxes, the 18 year, you get them late in the year in 18, and you're led
Why do they get them late?
Well, that's a good question. You'd like to get them earlier. If your operating agreement or other such things requires you to get them earlier, that is good. You should be on top of the finances of the business with which you have a relationship, and then you should be on top of what to expect. And that's what we've talked about, that even if you get an extension, you're trying to figure out your taxes, you have some idea of what's going on. You can't be totally in the dark. So that's a great question. You right out of the year in January, February, you want to have an idea of that standing, and you want to look in your operating agreements as to what kind of financial information should be shared with you by those in charge of a business, a pass-through business, if you're not involved in that business, right? Here, he's in management of the business, but there's apparently an issue about the way there's a CFO or something involved in the business, and he has a certain role, but this CFO has another one. The point being that he gets a K1 that shows lots of losses in the prior year. He's led to believe that those should carry forward and create significant losses in his current year to offset the income that they've made. The problem becomes that in late of that same year, in 18, the FBI raids those offices of the solar company and commence a criminal investigation that a Ponzi scheme was underway. So here's a relationship that he's got with a company that then is raided. It is under criminal investigation, and they seized all the documents of the business, including Mr. Rosselli's laptop, it reports. And the bottom line is the K1 for the next year doesn't come. Okay?
But what made them do the raid, and what triggered that?
It doesn't say much in the case except that a Ponzi scheme was underway, and that that the people involved in that company, the ownership, remember he's just managing and has a role in it, they were indicted and pled guilty to federal crimes. Okay? So when that happens, the people with whom he's associating with have serious problems. That then impacts, in this case, Mr. Rosselli and his wife. Okay? Wow. And so what we understand happens, though, is that when the accountant that he's working with to get their taxes straight, they are dealing with the fact they didn't get a K1, and now they're questioning that prior K1 with those significant losses, right? Now they're wondering, did those losses on that prior year make sense, and should we really go back and question those, right? And so
did they have an attorney with their company?
Well, they had a CPA. Now the company that they were associated with, I'm not sure. They did have a CFO and a sense that they were run, but the Rosellis had their own person, and then
their own. You mean their own attorney?
Right. They had their own accountant and their own lawyer who was doing their work with them, and then they were in the process of looking for a new one when all this happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this is what makes it very difficult. So basically the facts here are that the K1 from the prior year that showed all these losses did not smell right, okay? Now they're questioning the prior year that gave a lot of losses and their current year that at that time. So they go ahead and get the extension, which is reasonable. Okay. But by the time October rolls around of 19, they still hadn't filed their 18 taxes. All right? So the question becomes, when compliance checks are run by the IRS as part of the examination of this solar company, right? They discover that in the compliance check of the company that went under from the FBI raid, that they ran a compliance check, and they found out through that raid, right, which is in 2021, that there was no return filed by the Rosellis in 18, right?
Okay.
So you can see what's unfolding.
I
now
see,
you have an open frame, if you will, on the if you're bowling. If the proverbial you get a score every year, you file a return, right? So you don't get two gutter balls. Then you've got all your lanes filled. You're doing good, right?
Yeah.
But if you gutter ball and don't file a return in the middle of a series of years, how does it come up?
Raises a flag.
Right. And this suggests how
that answers my question.
Yeah. So because we assume they then filed in 19 and 20, I assume that's what would happen here with the facts. So you have that missing year, right? So the problem we get into in these situations is the Rosellis then face IRS collection efforts, because when you don't file a return, they can substitute a return, they can use the K-1s that that eventually come out, or they can use other means to figure out what to tax. And I think there were W-2s or different forms. So the IRS was able to figure out that they appeared to have not filed, and therefore the IRS on the collection side is pursuing what they perceive to be the taxes owed, right? So the Rosellis then have rights. You still have rights when this kind of thing happens. So you get in dialogues with the IRS on the collection side about, hey, what happened? And the Rosellis, to their credit, go through all this with the collection people, the IRS. They respond to CDP hearings and so forth, and they're on top of that. Now, the question then becomes, in response to that, what they talk about is, well, what about filing this prior return? And so the facts of the case help us see that there's going to be a review undertaken of what happened. And interestingly enough, the question becomes, what about penalties, right? And did they act with reasonable cause? And so the case starts to flush out that what did you do with regard to the actual filing obligation? And this helps us get back to some of the things we've talked about, which is the obligation to file, right? And the ability to file an 8082 when you don't get a K1, right? Remember, we've talked. Everybody understands the idea that an 8082 filed against an erroneous K1, right? Well, there's also this notion that if you are, you have the ability to estimate, you have the ability to get into the financials, you can make a good faith effort to report the impact of the missing K1 on your return using Form 8082, right? And so once you do that, then you can file the return. You can then do that. So that's kind of one thing that's unfolding in the case. But the other thing is this idea of reliance on the advisors. What caught my eye was the question was the advisors were willing to come forward and help them and say, yes, I told them that they needed to get the K1, they needed to get it revised and so forth. But they weren't talking about not filing. You see the difference? And so the responsibilities and what's going on in this situation is what's the specific advice you're getting, right? And so failing to file the return is different than the actual all this other stuff going on. And so the court gets into that, and it talks about how if lack of information was a concern, there are several options that can be pursued, including the submission of a Form 8082 or the inclusion of supplemental statements and file an amended return.
Let me help understand it. So basically, file regardless, even though you have these things going on, right?
Yeah.
So to show the good faith?
Correct. In other words, file based on what you know. To the extent that there's some unknown, make an estimate. To the extent of that estimate is you're not comfortable, you can file, and then explain that, and then say you're still waiting for the impact of determining exactly where it is on this particular form. Maybe you put a placeholder on the return or whatnot.
You'll be better off.
You're
than
better
not
off.
filing at all.
Correct. And so the idea that we're emphasizing here is that, once again, we see how when you get into the nitty-gritty of this, at first blush, it seems reasonable. You've got prior year losses, you've got your current year, it's a mess, you've got this FBI raid, you've got all this going on. It's very understandable for someone to say, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to file. But as we see that's broken down here, there's a little bit more to it. File, but explain, right? File, but explain. It doesn't say throw your hands up and just, give up. So I think that's the kind of challenge for our audiences. You get in these situations where this other impact hits them, and they've got the advice, but the advice wasn't don't file. The advice was let's keep digging to get the information we need. And so one of the things they talk about is when they spoke to the prior preparer or a lawyer came forward and said, hey, I'll help you, I'll tell you what's going on. But when they pinned down to the issue, did you, sir, advise them not to file a return? You follow me? That was not the advice. They could not prove that was the advice.
Oh, okay.
See what I'm saying?
It's just they didn't advise them to file.
Right. Well, yeah. Well,
but they have to be careful.
Well, yeah, absolutely. There is the suggestion that Rosselli's believed that with all this advice they were getting, that was the assumption. I don't know. I want to look more closely at kind of what that is. But that's a great point. Certainly they testify in the case that they believe they did not and could not file an accurate return. But as the court says, what we're talking about there is did you act it with reasonable cause not to file that? And so that's kind of important. And remember, we're talking about the collection effort and what obligations you have and trying to deal with the return. And they were doing everything they could. But I think what we want to emphasize with the case is that this opportunity was there that the court mentions. One of the ways they could have resolved it was to file an 8082. And so I can read it exactly. It says, as we have discussed, at the time the return was due, they had no scheduled K-1s reporting losses for 2018. There were significant reasons to doubt that they would ever receive the schedule. Their own advisor raised questions about the prior K-1. This put them on notice of the questions, and then it comes back and says there was this opportunity to file an 8082. And so submission of a form 8082 can assist in this process, right, while you're waiting for complete information. So I don't think we've talked quite like that about how an 8082 can fill the gap, if you will. I think more and more people are learning about the 8082 and of its critical importance when you're staring at K1s. And so you kind of have this other side of the coin. Our audience should say, okay, I get it now. There's a K1, and the other side of that K1 coin is this 8082 opportunity to be each and every year look at that situation. So if you don't get the one side of the coin, you still have to worry about the 8082 as the way to solve that. If you get it and it's wrong, you use the 8082 to fix it. But you don't do that until you try and deal with it all with with the company to see if they can fix the K1 if it's a mistake, or you do everything you can to get the K1 in the case of it being late or whatnot. And then on the front end for our folks out there, when you're putting business together and you're dealing with your terms of your agreement, your operating agreement, that's the ideal time to figure out how the finances are going to work in the K1s. When are they going to come out? How are those going to be addressed? So again, I think we're cautioning our audience at the end of this year. There's a lot going on. There's a lot. It's not saying it's not complex and everything, but be vigilant in terms of how you're approaching these K1s you get what's going on and whatever, and kind of try and it's the beginning point, not the end point, right? And if you haven't got one, your beginning point is go get it, or start to look at the 808.2 as the counter to that.
You heard him, folks. Be vigilant and be careful of the advices you are receiving. You can reach Mr. T. Scott Tufts at 877-647-7887. Again, that number is 877-647-7887. Or you can reach him at stufts@pcc.law. That's stufts@pcc.law. Or you can visit the website at privatecorporatecounsel.com. Thank you and have a wonderful holiday.